So I grew up here in Oklahoma, Christian house, Christian home, really traditionally strict kind of thing, but I never, I went to Christian school, church 3 times a week, all of that. But it never really just, I never really just fully bought in. I was raised that way, so I was just told that's what you believe.
Yeah, at some point you got to make the choice.
Yeah, and I didn't really, I went through the motions, it was more lip service than anything. It's what I was supposed to do, so I did it. And it wasn't until I started getting in my teen years that I started, you know, asking why and, I didn't feel fully satisfied with all the answers, and I started rebelling and against, all the rules and all the, the structure, and started getting this real rebellious attitude. And so it led to me, when I was young, like a year old, my dad and mother divorced, and then my dad remarried when I was like 8 years old. And so I was living with my dad and stepmother. And when I was 16 or so, I decided I wanted to go live with my biological mother in Texas because, there's less rules, She wasn't, following Jesus or anything. So long story short, I ended up moving down to Texas when I was 16 and went from one extreme to the other, to where nothing but rules, you can't do this, you can't do that, to do anything you want, just let me know where you're at. And I wasn't ready for that, so I don't know what 16-year-old it is, but, and she did the best she could. I don't blame her. I loved her dearly. But so I started, going out to house parties and getting drunk, and all I cared about was sports and girls, and that was my priorities, so I'd go to focus on sports, and then I'd go to parties, and started getting drunk, like blackout drunk. And so long story short, when I was 17, went to a house party, got blackout drunk, and woke up the next morning in a jail cell. And what had happened, I didn't remember it, but what had happened is I came home, I thought, but I actually went into a neighbor's house at like 12 a.m., 1 a.m., something like that. And the husband and wife were sleeping. I was walking around in their house like it was my own. They thought I was a burglar. So him and I, he, obviously, and rightfully so, attacked me, jumped on me. And I had a knife, and I pulled that knife out, and I hurt him really bad. Almost killed him, but all grace to God that, he didn't die. And I was, at that time, 17. And so, like I said, long story short, at 17 years old, this is in Texas in 1993, and they were in the middle of a big prison boom. They were quick to lock you up and throw away the key. And so I was sentenced at 17 to a 30-year prison sentence in Texas penitentiaries. And so at 17, I got introduced to prison from a kid that grew up in a Christian home. Had 2 high school fights at that point, they weren't even fights, it's just disagreement. The next day you're best friends, and but then I went in there and had to learn to survive. And so just a young, scrawny kid trying to survive in prison in the early 90s in Texas was, it was an awakening, so for the first 10 years or so, I was mad at the world, mad at God, mad at the world, just didn't care, and stayed in trouble, but it was all along, I had a grandmother that prayed for me daily. I had parents who still prayed for me all the time and tried to share the love of Jesus with me, but I wasn't ready for it at that time. God was still molding and shaping my heart. And so after 10 years in prison, I had kind of hit the bottom of the bottom in there, what's called administrative segregation. So I was in ad seg for 4 years in a cell by myself, and had a lot of time to think and realize, something's wrong here. I'm doing this the wrong way. It's kind of, as we say in there, it's my choice to do either easy time or hard time, and I was choosing the hard time just by being a knucklehead. And so I was sitting there, and you can't really talk to anybody because you're in a cell by yourself, but you have neighbors you know, that are next to you in other cells. And I was looking for a book to read because I didn't have anything in there. And the guy next to me had some books, and I asked him, you got any books to read? And he said, I have this book called The Case for Faith. And, you know, I was like, Lee Strobel, yeah. And I said, man, I don't want to read a Christian book. I'm not interested. Do you have a novel or something? He's like, that's all I got, you know. And I was like, well, I was bored out of my mind. So I was like, well, send it over here. And I mean, not even halfway through that book, I remember telling myself out loud, you're an idiot, man. God's real. And I finished that book and I knew God was real. And I prayed to God in that cell to come into my heart for real and to change me. And just the things that started happening were, you know, it's just all God. You know, I worked my way out of there and started getting elevated up in I don't know how to say it, but in there you have jobs, and they could be very bottom rung, you know, janitorial jobs where you're cleaning up the worst of the worst, or you can have good jobs. And within a short amount of time, you know, I was having one of the best jobs there is there, you know, and working in a saddle shop, working with leather and making saddles and all kinds of things that had to do with leather, and became their top saddle maker, and got involved with, you know, started going to the chapel there, and we were blessed to have a chaplain, old cowboy preacher, had a 10-gallon cowboy hat. I'll never forget him. He was amazing. He was probably the biggest mentor in my life. And he had a heart for prisoners. He used to be a sheriff, and he retired and he became a prison chaplain. And he wanted to build us up and to be ministers. And that's where I learned that God had a calling on my life for worship, to be a worship leader. And I started getting involved in the ministry there and taking his ministry classes and just drawing closer to God until I was preaching, and then I was leading worship, and I taught myself guitar and learned I could sing a little bit. So for about 8 years, you know, I led worship in there and was just an elder in his ministry. And all along, you know, God was showing me favor. You know, I was not in trouble anymore, and I was just had favor there in the unit. I could pretty much walk around with no problems whatsoever. And yeah, but all along this is, you know, coming up on 15 years, 18 years of being incarcerated, and waiting, you know, seeing parole every few years and them saying no every time. And, you know, and I'm living my life according to the word, and I was just faithful and really sincere and expecting God to answer this prayer to let me be free again, you know, to not spend all my life in there. And but after denial after denial after denial, I started to lose hope and lose faith, you know. And finally in 2017, so 24 years later, and at this point I had pretty much just became a lukewarm Christian, you know, didn't even know if I believed anymore. I'd stopped serving in the ministry, and I had let my circumstances, you know, dictate my faith, basically. And then 24 years later, I was 41 years old, and boom, I make parole. And 24 years out of 30 on the sentence. So yeah, so I was in there from the age of 17 till I was 41. And, you know, long story short, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I got out and came home to Oklahoma, you know, where I actually had family and stuff. My mother had passed away probably 3 months before I was released. And so I came home to Oklahoma and stayed with my dad and stepmom for a while, and got on my feet. And God started, even though I wasn't serving him at that point, he still was opening doors for me, you know. And it just, I think back on things and I'm so undeserving of where I am today. But I guess that's the beauty of it, you know. He doesn't give us what we deserve, you know. And for years, I got into plumbing, God opened the door for that, and I became an apprentice plumber, and then within a few years got my license, and I've been doing that, ever since I've been out. And God is just one step after another. Even when I thought doors were shutting, other doors were opening for, advancement in my career, even when I wasn't necessarily serving Him. But a few years ago, I met my soon-to-be wife, Misty, and He used her in such a way that was to draw me back to Him. I had no idea, but her example, watching her walk with Christ, it started awakening that feeling inside again, to where I used to feel that peace, and just know what it was like to walk with God, and just to know He's in control. And God used her to slowly but surely draw me back to Him, and I'm just so thankful, because ever since I started faithfully serving Him again, I rededicated my life to Him, a few years ago, and other doors have opened. I went from thinking I would never have a future, no future prospects, no skills, no talents to contribute to society is what I was told and what I felt, to now I'm a construction plumbing supervisor over a $36 million project. And it's just the way God has elevated me. It just blows my mind, and the way He's brought me a family, a wife and children that I never thought I would have. I thought a family that's not for me. I'm gonna be out in my 40s and just getting started. I'll just worry about myself. But God had other ideas. He had other plans. And I had fallen away from worship, but when I got with Misty and started falling in love with Jesus again, we found Pathway, and I immediately felt the pull, like, I gave you these gifts for a reason. I gave you these gifts to help my people worship me. And I don't think I'm that great, but I just thought, hey, I've got some gifts, let me contribute them here to this church. We felt like we were gonna stay here and this would be home. So that's what I did. I got involved with the ministry and started off just playing some acoustic guitar, and then, before long they were asking me, hey, lead a song, and help us do this. And now it's just amazing to me, to where God has brought me today. And I've never felt more fulfilled and at peace in my life, because of just finally letting go and trusting Him instead of trying to do it all myself. Just trying to do it all myself just led to nothing but heartache and pain and distance from God. And surrendering to Him was the best thing I ever did in my life. And ever since I did that, it's just been one blessing after another. Sure, life's not all, easy and always easy, but, if you have a God's perspective, then you realize that, those little things are really little in comparison to what's waiting for us and what He has in store for us. So, yeah, that's kind of my testimony. My wife had no idea that I'd ever been in prison. These are all prison tattoos, but most people are kind of shocked, just because, that's the old me, and God, He changed me. This is the new me, and it's all because of God, and I just give Him the glory. So just really thankful.
So I was more or less born and raised here in Yukon, and my parents unfortunately got divorced when I was about 5 years old, and I think that kind of starts my story. So my mom ended up leaving my father, and he ended up getting custody of me. My mom was not in a place to take care of me, and shortly after, she was remarried, and she moved about 3 hours away, far from me. I always felt a need to stay with my dad. I just knew that he needed me, and I kind of needed him. But I was able to see my mother, but we had more of like a friendship, like a good friendship than than a mother and daughter relationship. And I would see her in the summers mainly. It really wasn't on the weekends or anything. And she definitely introduced me to a lifestyle that was not appropriate for children. I understood recreational drug use at a really early age. But fortunately, I knew, now that I look back at it, I knew Jesus had my hand through that the whole time and protected me from that. But coming home, you know, my dad was a great dad. I was a cheerleader. He was a cheer dad. You know, he was the only cheer dad on the team. And I had my own, you know, a new car. I had everything that a little girl wanted. But grace was just not in his vocabulary. He gave me everything, and he was my protector. But he was just a great man. But I always felt very alone still. I didn't know where my place was. I kind of felt like a mistake. I felt like I didn't have a place. And I remember at night being sad and fearing death and fearing loneliness and fearing my future. And that, as I got older, I think that kind of led to what became my testimony. I was always searching for love in the wrong places, and I wanted to be accepted by somebody and to just understand me. So I ended up starting to wait tables and serving tables, and I loved that. I loved the aspect of waiting tables and waiting on people. I loved my regulars, you know, but that lifestyle can morph you into something that it morphed me into that was not okay. I ended up becoming a very, very heavy alcoholic. And I had a daughter at 21, her name is Ryan. And even after she was born, or her father ended up having issues with some drug abuse. And thankfully the Lord was protecting me in that, and I was able to keep him away from both of us and keep her secure with me. And he more or less kind of floated into the background, thankfully. So it's like I kind of created her on my own, but she was such a gift. But being that age and being young and still searching for what I thought was love, my father ended up taking care of her a little bit more than I would have, that I'm proud to say now. I didn't know that children were a gift from God. And I'm very hard on myself with that, because I wish I would have realized that then. But again, yeah, just how precious that time was with her. So keep on tracking. I'm still waiting tables. I'm still bartending. And it led me straight to the bottle. Pretty bad. I probably drank half a handle of whiskey a day between the ages of 23 and 33. You know, it just progressed. I was a very closeted drinker. No one really knew. I don't know how people didn't know, but again, another blessing that was given to me in the midst of all that was I met my husband. We've been married for a little over 10 years now. And when we got married, I was deep into my addiction. Again, I was really, really good to hide it, unfortunately. And we were married about 4 years, and I was working at an oil and gas company. And at this point, I was drinking morning, noon, and night, and still being able to function. And Jesus was holding me, and I didn't know that's what was holding me. So I want to say the winter of, let me think here, 2019, it got pretty prevalent. I went to the dentist, and he could not work on me fully because my gums were bleeding so bad, and I was clotting. I was very weak, and my eyes were yellow, and very yellow. My liver was shutting down on me. And fast forward to the first week of 2020, I ended up leaving work and going to the ER. It was my third time to go, and I just played it off as dehydration. And my husband got there, and the doctor asked me how much I had to drink at that time, and it was like 9:30 in the morning, and I informed him it was like 4 ounces of whiskey, and he looked over to my husband and said, she's 3 times over the legal limit. She needs help. And this was like the first time that I knew that Jesus was in the room. I had cried out to him in the shower for years because I knew that I couldn't do it on my own. But if I said anything to anybody, like everyone would see my ugly parts and there would be judgment. And I didn't know this beautiful relationship with God. I just knew that he had rules and I wasn't worthy of whatever he had to give me. But I knew that I was at my last straw and I needed to be saved. And I just cried out to him. And my husband looked at me and said, "It's gonna be okay, we're gonna get through this." And that was the first time I'd ever seen grace. My father was such a great man, but grace was just not in his vocabulary. And my husband looked at me with no judgment and just love. And the next day, we found a recovery program, and I was able to get into like an outpatient program. So I would have to go like 5 o'clock in the afternoon and 9 o'clock in the morning. And we're looking at February of 2020 right now. I went into my recovery program, and I knew, I was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, had to have a drink. I was going to hit my withdrawals eventually, and I did. And I got extremely weak. My abdomen swelled up, and I called my husband. I was like, "We've got to get to the ER." So we get to the ER, and I was in there for a week and almost lost my liver. I ended up having to have a blood transfusion. They had to drain off the fluid off of my stomach. I went in at 160 pounds and I came at 140. My husband and I ended up spending our 5th anniversary in that hospital room. And he's just never left my side, and has just showed me so much grace and so much love. And I just knew that it was Jesus. I had no relationship with him yet. As much as I knew was, the Noah's Ark and some of the small kids story. I never went to church. I wasn't brought up in church. I knew that he was there, but I didn't know anything about him. And so after that, this was my chance. Like, I just needed that one more chance to live, and he gave me that. So I got out of the hospital, thankfully, and ever since then, it's been a struggle. COVID hit, so we're looking at March now, and it was like I know that was such a hard time in so many people's lives, but it ended up being such a good thing for me because the world had just stopped. And I didn't have any pressure. The world stopped for a moment. And I was able to just surround myself with the people that truly loved me and cared about me, and I got to recover. And life has been so beautiful. Fast forward, we had talked about having children, but it just never, my body wasn't letting me at that point. And even the doctor said, like, you have like no chance. Like, you might be able to in 3 years. And so in about 3 years, I went to Disney World with my husband and the family, and we came back home, and I swore I was going through menopause. I have an 18-year-old now, or at that point I had a 15-year-old, and I swore I was like going through menopause. Something was going wrong, something was happening. I didn't know, my body was being weird, and I Googled, and I took a pregnancy test, and I was blessed with a baby, and his name's Bear, and he is the best thing that's ever happened in our lives. I just never knew that it was going to be this good, that he was going to actually bring all my dreams come true. And my husband and Bear, my daughter now, with everything that I put her through. She's going to be going to Oklahoma Christian in the fall. She is more than I could ever ask for. And a girl, and a daughter, and a friend. And so then it was just more God just like, Jennifer, have you not seen me? He was just on me, and I knew it. And I got a flyer in the mail, and it was to this church. It was to Pathway. And I just knew that I needed to get to this church. I needed my children to know Christ, to have a relationship with Him. And so we came here, and the first one I met was Andrea, and she saw Bear, and she just loved us from day one. And then it just got even better with the people that I met. Pastor Brian and Coranda and all of my girls from my group. 6 years. I'll be sober in January, 7 years from alcohol. And I work in the garden on the weekends here. I have a church, and I work in their garden, and you'll find me in Kids Path. I never thought ever that I would be living the life that I'm living. And I know so much more that I'm going to experience with His love and with His guidance and with His grace. And it's just been amazing. It's just been amazing. From where I came from, and just feeling so lost and so alone, and not having any hope, and fearing death, to now loving life so much, and knowing that there's a future, and knowing that there's a good future, and He has a plan for us, and that He loves us, and that I am His daughter. And it's been just a miracle in my life.